Okay, well, welcome to everybody. I'm on my phone right now. You probably heard with ODOT, we're having some system issues. So I don't have my camera on right now, and hopefully we'll be able to stay connected this way for now and then maybe join later via our computers. So that's kind of a technical fun thing we get remotely, I guess, periodically. Luckily, it doesn't happen that often. So yeah, welcome to, this is a first Oregon Modeling Steering Collaborative meeting of the year. And I think, Carol, you have the, maybe the agenda up. And I'll just kind of run through that real quickly. We'll talk about sort of upcoming conferences and then that Carol has a list of, and if people have other ones, you can let me know at that time. We have some general business talking about minutes and then the next meeting. Then we have our regular subcommittee meeting updates. And then we have I'd say the meat of the meeting today is really around the rulemaking and strategic initiative update that we'll see from several folks here. One is Transformational Integrated Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction Project, the TIGER project. Then we'll have climate friendly and equitable communities related to the transportation planning rule with Cody Meyer, and Maya Buchanan's going to do the TIGER project update for us and information sharing. And then employee commute options with Michael Orman and Karen Fontwines from DEQ. And then that will wrap things up. So that's the agenda for today. So let's start off with highlighting the conferences that might be coming up. I'm not sure, just in the interest of time, that I'm going to read through all of those. But if people know of others that are not on the list, if you could, feel free to speak up or add that to the chat so Carol's aware of them. Or if there's any here that somebody wants to highlight that they might be going to, this is a good time to do that as well.
Hey Brian, it's Chris.
Hey Chris.
I got a quick question. So has anyone heard anything about the next TRB Innovations and Travel Modeling Conference? I believe the last one, these are the ones that happen every other year, kind of in concert with the planning applications conferences. But the last one that was scheduled was in Seattle for, June of 2020. So the next cycle, that one was canceled, obviously, but the next one would be scheduled for this coming June. But I haven't heard anything about that conference. So I'd be curious to hear if anyone else knows anything about that conference, because it's a good one. It's a good conference. Yeah. Okay.
Chris, this is Becky. I inquired a couple months ago about the planning applications conference and was told that it is not going to occur indefinitely. They're revamping that committee and they're revisiting how they're going to manage those two conferences. And
okay.
and I got virtually no other information. So.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Becky.
All right, thanks, Becky. And so that those of you from ODOT know, I think our systems may be back up now. So I'm going to join that way in a minute here. Any other conferences that people might want to highlight?
The National Planning Conference is next week in San Diego. I'll be going to that. And then I'm thinking about going to the TRB conference on scenario planning. Has anybody been to that? I'm just curious if that's a good one.
I have. That's the first I've seen that conference, was this slide 30 seconds ago. So this is a new one for me.
This is Tara. I know some people are attending from FHWA on the Vision of L work.
What's that, Tara?
Some people that are working on Vision Eval are attending. I think there's a paper in there that RSG has, but I don't know of the conference anymore than that.
Yeah. Seems like a smaller one.
Okay, yeah, like I say, feel free to add any others to the chat if you think about something that you might want Carol to share more broadly with the OMSC group. Okay, general business. So our last meeting was in October of 2021, and Carol's posted the minutes. There's a link to them in the agenda if you're interested in going back and looking at some of the topics we had there. I think we had a lot of the greenhouse gas related information sharing last time related to some of the Peter Hurley had a presentation related to some of the work that's going on with the Portland climate strategy, I believe. Tara talked a little bit about what ODOT's doing with the GHG STIP related work as well. And then some of the subcommittee recommendations for GHG were discussed at that last meeting. So some good information in the notes about that. And if we don't have any questions or any additional comments on that from anyone, I don't know if anyone has any additional comments. I'll give you a minute to let me know. Okay, if not, can I have someone move to approve those minutes?
I'll move
Thank
to
you, Chris.
approve.
And a second from someone?
A second.
Thank you, Chris.
2 seconds.
Okay, and perhaps I'll just let anybody who, if we're all, I don't know if we need to officially vote on those, Carol, probably not. If anyone has any issues or further comments, let Carol know. Thank you, guys. Next meeting, as you can see here, is October of this year. So that'll be something to mark your calendars for now. I'm sure Carol has some invites out for everybody too. All right, so ongoing business subcommittee updates. Becky, let's start with you, the modeling program coordination. committee.
Okay. I feel a little discombobulated because I don't have access to any of my information. That's all, of course, stored online.
Becky, that
Yes.
system is back up. So if you
No,
want,
I can't access any of my files. Only
you can't.
I
Okay.
am participating on my work laptop now.
Okay.
I
Okay.
have that.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
other than that, I'll go by memory. Just a quick reminder that this is one of the standing subcommittees, so it's always here. And we meet more often than the biannual meeting, 2 to 4 times a year. If we have special work, we can meet even more than that. And this group is typically the staff that work with MPOs and statewide modeling and analysis, model development, enhancement responsibilities. We met earlier this morning, and we had a really good meeting because we had some fascinating presentations. We heard from Metro about work that's been done related to equity and a bunch of different topics, the equity measures, and then some more detailed measures that dug into things. And it was really, really helpful to just give us a brief overview of how to approach some of this reporting on the equity level. We also heard from Metro about their use of the RITIS speed data and how it was used and how it is expected to be used in the future. We have regular updates from topic leaders, and we added a new topic leader today, and that relates to the greenhouse gas work done under the ad hoc greenhouse gas subcommittee. And so that's James. And he gave us a report on what they're working on. Excuse me. Let's see what else. We had a brief topic update on land use. That's from Kelly. And Josh Roll also shared some research that he's been doing related to the RIDIS and the INRIC speed data. So lots of information sharing at the meeting today. And the most exciting, of course, was looking at the updated charter. So we reviewed that, and it hasn't changed significantly, but we did add our, we're hoping to add equity topic leader, and then we have our new one from James from greenhouse gas. So I think that was a very bumpy way to report out on this committee. We will follow up on action items that were developed or that were identified from this morning's meeting and continue our monitoring of progress related to freight data and the recommendations from that freight subcommittee, and as well as the GHG subcommittee, which is technically still it still exists. It hasn't been dissolved yet, but it's not expected to be around longer than a total of 3 years. And we still have a lot of stuff to coordinate on and work through together, and you'll hear more of that from other subcommittees reporting. And there's a lot of crossover between our different subcommittees. And we have to manually think about where we want to go in the future with our models, and try to come up with some research ideas so we can take advantage of the research money that ODOT receives every 2 years. It can really help us, and we have used it in the past as well. With that, do I have another slide? I think I'm done. And I pass it off to Alex, the chair of the Technical Tools Subcommittee.
Thanks, Becky. Just as a quick reminder, Technical Tools is a standing committee like MPC, and it allows us to kind of fire up ad hoc technical items that need to get worked on with kind of with different project teams, kind of as that technical topic dictates. So I'll kind of update on what we've been doing. If you can move to the next slide. So ahead of this meeting, I think most of the subcommittees did a charter refresh. So we just updated, refreshed the charter and updated that. A couple of the main items on that charter, just a reminder that to help supplement the OHAS effort back in 2020, but actually became 2021 because of COVID, we're doing updated ODOT's COM program to ensure that the counts that were collected were model grade, and so those counts have started and are ongoing to help get kind of a baseline of target data around at least the auto mode. We still have a conversation ongoing under Tech Tools around emerging tech. It's an active conversation, but it's on hold while the co-chair Nick Meltzer is out of the country. We'll look to start that back up at the end of the summer. As we updated the charter, we formally added a priority A8 out of the GHG subcommittee as the GHG subcommittee finalized its work and distributed some of the tasks. The Tech Tools got coordinate data and tools for assessing non-standard day conditions. So the idea there is our travel models are usually kind of like on an average weekday with good weather. And so this is about trying to represent what 365 days of bad weather and traffic accidents, things like that, better representing that in our metrics, performance measures. So that's been added. The work hasn't started, but that's been added with the charter. MCE, which is a multi-criteria evaluation post-processor to our travel models, has been on the agenda. The charter. We've had some work towards that and some more coordination with Metro and in building that multi-criteria process onto the back of Oregon's tools for a more common set of metrics across our modeling work. But someone put that on hold as the last item there. The big one that's firing up is an RFP that's being put together through Tech Tools around the next generation of our travel models, which will be activity-based. And so the idea is that as OHAS comes online, we'll have a big effort to do a new joint estimation with that OHAS data across the state of Oregon. It'll be an activity-based platform. And so we put the MC work on hold a little bit because we expect to kind of have that be a part of that larger new generation of tools rollout. And so the enhanced performance measures or the enhanced way to get information out of models would then be a part of that, next generation of tools, as opposed to making it work with the current generation, which is working in Metro. It's not that it can't be done. So then moving forward, advance to the next slide. So that's kind of what's been ongoing. And so moving forward, as mentioned, there's this big effort to do this contracting, releasing and evaluating these proposals, then doing the contracting around doing this joint estimation with the new survey data. So that's a big piece of what the Tech Tools is currently doing. And over the summer, we plan to kind of finalize that contracting and start to getting work underway on that effort. The first piece would be a design task of the design for that next generation of travel models. As mentioned, Nick's out of the country right now, but in the fall we'll be starting, after summer, we'll be starting back up the emerging tech group. ODOT related to, with its partner RSG for the Oregon Transportation Plan is doing a lot of team at BMAT work. So in the past, Tech Tools and Emerging Tech have been doing some team at EMAT evaluation. So that's kind of continuing through the OTP, and both through Emerging Tech and then below on the next item, the future scenario assumptions, which is the assumptions that are going into the OTP, that both the team at BMAT and those future assumptions out of the OTP will be shared back with the group through the Tech Tools. Additionally, as mentioned, the COUNT program, it's been collecting data for a number of years. I think we're getting at the point where we're going to start providing some halfway or demo examples for what that COUNT data set looks like for the different MPOs. So my plan is to start getting that to our MPO partners in the next month or two, and then also on the Tech Tools charter, our peer reviews facilitated as needed. We don't have any on the immediate agenda, but just a kind of a plug that it's always better than not to conduct peer reviews. So happy to facilitate that as the need arises. That's my update, Carol. Happy to take questions.
Any questions for Alex? Or for Becky, I guess, too. Sorry.
This is Tara. I just put a comment in the chat that I felt like the discussion of non-standard day topic, which you're going to incorporate in the Tech Tools, would benefit a lot from what we saw this morning that Metro's doing with the RIDIS and DKS did with that FHWA cluster approach. Cool stuff.
Thanks. All right, Chris, update on the travel survey subcommittee.
Okay, thanks, Brian. For those of you who are new to OMSC, we have a subcommittee that's organized around conducting a statewide travel survey for Oregon and Southwest Washington. So that subcommittee is quite active right now as we are in the throes of planning for a survey within which we'll be in the field, hopefully in the spring of 2022. So, past work has been to do a lot of sort of preliminary scoping, gather sort of information from our peers around the country, and that work was conducted, actually before 2020. So post 2020, we've been involved in doing a lot of the more detailed planning for the upcoming survey. So Carol, could you advance the slide? So this is, like I said, this is very much a collaborative effort. So I'm serving as sort of the day-to-day project manager, so the liaison between sort of our consultant team and the public side project team. Lane Council of Governments is serving as the contract administrator. So Kelly Clark is managing that work on behalf of the group, and our our partner, our significant partner, ODOT, is also a huge a huge partner in this. And so, and Becky is serving sort of as the ODOT conduit and sort of, historic sort of connection to past survey efforts. And so, again, much appreciation to Kelly and Becky for all their continued hard work on this project. So like I said, we made a lot of progress. I think probably since we last.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Nope. Okay. Since we last met, we held a series of work sessions with, the MPOs around the state, as well as other stakeholders from the region and transit agencies, various state agencies, to get some feedback on scoping, data needs and potential questions. Those work sessions were conducted in the winter generally. We had one for sort of the smaller, medium-sized MPOs as a group, and then we had one for sort of the larger MPOs as a group. The next one of these sessions, these stakeholder work sessions, is going to be happening on May 5th. And so for those of you who've been involved in this work, who are either on the subcommittee or sort of friends of the subcommittee or other stakeholders, I hope you have that availability on May 5th, and your calendar is sort of appropriately marked. On May 5th, we'll be talking through our latest technical memo that was provided by our consultant team. And so that technical memo covers the topics of sampling approach and recruitment strategies, covers geographic stratification strategies, and it also covers some survey implementation methodologies and actual sample plans. And so we'll be covering that in detail on the 5th. We'll also be talking through some of the recommendations for incentives. We've had some discussions around whether or not, gift cards from various, businesses like Amazon or Visa are appropriate, and whether or not we can use those within the federal guidelines and rules and all that kind of stuff. Talking through some materials, that'll be applied to the invitation postcards that go out to invite folks to participate in the survey. So, color, logo, branding that's associated with those postcards. We'll be offering up some alternatives for the study name or the survey name. That's a sort of a decision that's sort of easier talked about than made, and so we'll be working through that a little bit. We have to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible. Like I said, this is a statewide effort as well as Southwest Washington effort, so we want to make sure we're being as inclusive as possible to our potential participants, and then making sure we're not arousing undue suspicion over sort of what we're trying to accomplish here. And so all that needs to be treated fairly carefully. So we'll be talking through some of those topics. Looking forward, other things to sort of keep on your radar as to what we're going to be up to. We are aiming toward having what we call a pre-test of the actual survey instrument. So you'll be able to test out, the actual survey through a mobile application or through a web application. So you'll get to participate in the survey as if you were a participant. And we're going to use sort of that effort to inform some refinement and some update and sort of tweaking of the survey instrument. So that's our pre-test. Look for that in late May, early June. And then we'll continue to refine, the instrument over the course of the summer. And then we'll have an actual pilot or expanded pre-test, in the fall before we commit to locking down the actual application for implementation in the spring. And I mentioned sort of the spring implementation. That's a bit of a new development. As we sort of march through the scoping and the planning, we're realizing that it's probably more realistic and potentially strategically a better decision to opt for a spring 2023 implementation rather than a fall of 2022. Given the midterm elections and sort of all the political activity that'll sort of be in the air in the fall, this coming fall. And so we're focusing and coalescing around kind of a spring 2023 election. So, and I think I am going to stop there and pause for questions. And it looks like Alex has one.
Yeah, this is a thought exercise. I don't know if we're going to come up with an answer, but I woke up early this morning thinking about model.
Are they names?
What?
Sorry, Alex.
I was thinking about representing tolls in models way too early this morning, and just made me think about some of the weaknesses I've seen in the tools we have and how we're not going to have any survey data in Oregon with tolls. So I just was thinking it feels like there's a lot of money, at least in ODOT, flowing around tolls right now, and just kind of floating the idea about, I think we all want the survey to continue. And I think a really good argument for it to continue is that we need some toll samples after people are priced. So just floating that, I don't know if we're going to reason, just an idea that, or just floating.
Well, that's music to my ears, Alex. I would absolutely love to see this thing turn into kind of more of a continuous, regular effort. To the question specifically on tolls, we actually, in the question set, I think you'll remember this. We did have some questions specifically around, tolls. How do you pay for tolls? But since there actually are no tolls in Oregon, I mean, basically there are no tolls in Oregon. We have removed those questions now. However, we are talking about the potential for doing some additional sort of add-on surveys, after sort of the main survey is conducted, whether it's specifically around non-motorized travel, like bicycle travel, or it could be, one could envision maybe a stated, preference exercise around pricing or tolling that would help us get to, some of the inputs I think that we crave for our models, but don't have, right? And so we're always sort of begging and borrowing from other regions who have implemented tolling as to sort of values of times and the other important inputs you need to, to really do tolling analysis well. And so we can talk through those options, but you're right. That certainly strengthens the argument for, a continuous or more frequent survey effort to capture, new things that are happening sort of in the transportation landscape, within Oregon. So, yeah, I'm 100% there. Any other questions? So we'll be busy this summer. There'll be lots more to report on, and hopefully you'll all get a chance to take either the pretest or the pilot when those are available. So I think that does it for me, Carol.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, Oregon Modeling User Group. I think Kyle, Leming, and Garth are all on. So I guess Leming, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I'm supposed I'm the one that's late to do the update. So Oregon, of course, the OMAG, Oregon Modeling User Group is the coordinating committee is Kyle, myself, and Garth. Garth's just taking over from Joe Freeman this year, so it will be only. We're thankful for Joe's service for last year. And in terms of the update from the last OMSC meeting, we had two events. In October, we did an event covering COVID-19 travel impact. It's only a very timely and fitting topic. And then in January this year, we had an event on activity sim update. Pretty much we have the best possible panel on that topic. Both events are well attended. They're both virtual and also available on our OMAG website. Sorry, somebody wants to add something? Okay, I will continue then. Of course, we had to cancel a few events because the traditional social event post TRB networking events, because the Omicron surge, many have to cancel their plan to TRB. So we decided to cancel the traditional networking event as well. And then we planned for some other event along with the Whistler conference and so on. So those plan has to be changed or canceled pretty much last minute. So that's that. Looking ahead, we have 3 events kind of either planned or are being finalized. In May 12th, we'll have a joint event with ITE SimCab on a dynamic traffic assignment. So this, of course, kind of following the activity-based modeling. This only will be a topic that quite relevant and complement to that. And in fall, we are looking to do a event on transportation network company and first last mile transit. And we're just kind of over email, Carol and many others are coordinating a event on mobility policy, evolving best practices, and that's moving away from level service. So pretty exciting and cutting edge, or at least best practice there. So you're right. So we'll be, of course, meeting regularly to plan event for the next 2 years. So only feel free to reach out to Carol, myself, or Kyle, or Garth if you have any topic ideas. So I think that's all for me. So let me know if you have any questions, comments.
Any questions? All right, well, thank you, Aning. Hopefully everybody will join you for those 3 events that are coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're a little ahead of schedule, Brian, but I think all 3 of our speakers, well, at least 2 of them are on the line, and Maya, who's up first, she's here. So
Excellent. Great. So yeah, we have Maya Buchanan with Oregon Department of Energy talking about transformational integrated greenhouse gas emission reduction project, or I guess the acronym for that is TIGER. So welcome to Maya.
Thank you so much, everyone, and I will share my screen. Can you see that okay? I think
Yes,
you
it
can.
just came up. Yeah.
Yep.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
I don't think
we
we're
were
seeing the
your whole
PowerPoint.
screen.
Yeah.
There, yeah.
Okay, 1 second here. I'm so used to Teams at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies.
I know. Each one's a little different.
Okay, so let me know if that works for you.
Yes.
Got it.
Perfect. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm here to talk about what's known as a TIGER analyses, but the broader initiative is a roadmap to 2035. And so I'll give a pretty high level overview and then welcome points of connection with your work and any additional details I can provide here or following up. So the roadmap to 2035, I'll talk about the purpose, a little bit of the underlying motivation, and some of our expected outcomes. So the roadmap is intended to provide recommended actions from across Oregon sectors to help achieve Oregon's greenhouse gas reduction goals for 2035 for consideration by the governor and the legislature to take next steps. So this work does a few different things, and one of the main parts of the process that we're working on right now is taking stock of major actions that are underway to significantly reduce emissions. We're doing this to clearly identify the gap And then we're identifying equity-focused and financially realistic actions that can complement those efforts and address the gap. So the Oregon Global Warming Commission is serving as a steering committee for both the process and the analyses used to develop the roadmap. So if you come to the commission meetings over the last fall and well into this year, it's going to be a major agenda item that we discuss. ODO is supporting this work because we staff the commission and we're providing analysis, project management, and then we're also coordinating with our state agencies and other stakeholders. And this work, we're very grateful that we have support from the U.S. Climate Alliance to bring on energy modeling experts from the Sustainability Solutions Group. So many on this call have already been in touch with them through our discussions we've had with agencies. So here I just want to give an overview of the various components of this work. As I noted, one main reason we're doing this is to identify actions beyond those that are already occurring. And those are significant actions that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. We are evaluating not only the reduction potential in emissions, but the cost effectiveness, and we're analyzing the associated co-benefits. And that's something that's really new in these type of analyses that other states are doing. So I'll be talking about that a little bit more later on in my slide deck. So what we've been doing is we've been bundling actions, individual actions into broader scenarios. And you can think of those as pathways to meet the 2035 greenhouse gas reduction goal. We developed 3 different scenarios or pathways that use different bundles of those actions to meet the goal. And these reflect the range of scenarios that we heard from the commission and also from our stakeholders. So the first one is maximum electrification, and it relies on broadly electrification to meet our goals through renewable energy, transportation electrification, and industrial electrification. At the same time, clean hydrogen and renewable natural gas also play a role in that scenario. In the second scenario, alternative fuels, it relies much more on clean hydrogen and RNG and other alternative fuels to meet the goal. And electrification is still involved. So you can think of it as a scale between electrification and alternative fuels. And the balance is what varies between those 2 scenarios. The third is rapid transformation. And this really is just accelerating the timeline that we meet our goal by 5 years. So instead of 2035, we need it by 2030. And to accomplish this, we're very much needing to use all the tools in the toolbox to accelerate and expand actions in the previous 2 scenarios. And of course, there are overlapping actions within those 3. On that note, in developing the scenarios, we identified particular common themes related to natural working lands, materials, and energy efficiency. So these are common actions throughout our scenarios that we want to use because they're smart investments and they have high co-benefits. For example, we include materials because these recycling, reuse, and reduce actions are best practices, and there's great analysis at DEQ on this work. We include energy efficiency because it's Oregon's priority resource, its costs are low, it has minimal environmental impacts, and it's abundant. And we include natural working lands because of the work the commission did throughout last year to develop a proposal on sequestration actions that could be pursued. So here I'm showing a MAC curve, and this is one of the outputs of this work. Once we select the actions in each scenario, we'll need to determine how much reductions in emissions each action is expected to produce and how cost effective it is. And so this is known as a marginal abatement cost curve for each of the scenarios. It's really just an economic analysis, a snapshot that orders actions based on their cost effectiveness. So the dollars per metric ton reduced is what's showing along the y-axis. Actions that create savings extend below that 0 cost baseline in the middle. And those that have a cost extend, a net present cost extend above that zero cost line towards the right-hand side of this slide. So MAC curve is also showing on the horizontal or x-axis the amount, the quantity of emissions reductions created by an action. So the wider an action is on that scale, the more emissions we can expect, and the narrower is the opposite. Because we haven't done this analysis yet, this is just an illustrative example that our consultant generated for, I believe it was the city of Toronto, a different community, but we expect to see something like this that's based on Oregon's context, data, and modeling from other agencies. So I just want to note that this is one of the novelties of this work. Almost always these types of analyses stop with the economic analysis, and climate action plans from across the US are typically developed using only the cost effectiveness and amount of emissions reductions as inputs. But we really wanted the roadmap to be informed by more than that. We wanted to include a co-benefits and co-harms perspective to help with a clean energy transition. So on that note, here are some of the main buckets that we're considering for that. This is an analysis that will be following the guidance from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And how you do something like this is develop an indicator that has data available to be aggregated and measured at the county level. So we've been lucky to have really great information from OHA to help inform this work, and coordinating with DEQ, who's been working other types of information for CPP, et cetera. So this is going to be a central piece of how actions are holistically evaluated by the commission when the development of the roadmap is complete. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, this is obviously a really important part of this exercise to ensure that it reflects both the best available information from the state and many partners on this call, and that it can best serve Oregonians. So the roadmap has been developed. We've had multiple rounds of conversation with state agencies. There's nuanced data that continues to evolve quickly in this space. And to date, we've had 9 commission meetings and subcommittee meetings on this topic, and we'll be having additional public comment, public meetings for public comment, and more rounds of interviews with agencies. And I think that brings me to about my last slide here on the next steps. We've been spending more time than we initially expected on the analyses. Right now, we're focusing on the businesses planned. And that's to, like I said, just make sure we are using the best available information and reflecting the changes that are happening as we speak, as legislation unfolds. So the next step is to finalize both the cost benefits work and the co-benefits work, and then have additional public meetings and present findings so that the commission can evaluate, using all of that information, recommendations for the governor and the legislature. So I hope that was a good overview for you, and I'm happy to answer questions and help follow up with any details that might be helpful to you.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Maya. Any questions out there?
I have a question.
Oh, Cody. Hi, Cody. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Maya. Thanks for this. I'm always a little curious when you do those MAC curves. What year are you looking at? I'm just kind of like the assumptions on like what the fuel mix might be, or the, is it a future year, or is it the present year? Is it past?
Yeah. So I can go back to that slide if you'd like, just for a visual while we're talking about it. But it's supposed to be a net present value over a period of time. So because we are focusing on 2035. I believe it will be from the present day until that period, and the series of payments until then. And so those costs include operational costs, investment costs, and other savings that can accrue during that. So what our consultant does is they have a database that has financial information from other case studies, but we're also updating it with the Oregon context. And if there's additional information that you think would be of value for this, we would love to incorporate it as you see fit and what fits with their model, because we really hope that this is reflective of multiple efforts going on at the state.
Yeah, I guess what I asked is, I just feel like when I see like active transportation and the mode shift stuff, it just, in present day, that's going to give you a lot more bang for your buck, I feel like, in, reducing driving from the 4 million internal combustion engines on the road. But as the fleet gets cleaner and the fuels get kind of more, less carbon intensive in the future, then I can see that having a less benefit there. So I was just kind of curious as to like how, at what data point you measure some of this. Seems like it would really impact the effects.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can confirm that with our consultants, but I'm pretty sure that that would be taken into account, because when you do a net present value, it segregates by year and then takes that all into consideration, and they have a dynamic model. So I'd be really surprised if it was just for, 2 different snapshots of time. That's not my understanding of how it works, but I'd be happy to just triple confirm that for you, for your utility.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm just making a note. Thanks for the question.
I have a question, Brian.
Please.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So so this, I know you said that this was an illustrative sort of chart. So if we have a scenario where, say, we implement, statewide congestion pricing, right? And so we essentially price travel on freeways across the state or something like that. And so that pricing generates revenue that we could, in theory, reinvest, say, in, I know this is not legal right now, but we could reinvest in, infrastructure, active transportation, transit. Are you able to kind of then draw that, to reflect that in these charts and draw down, say, the cost or the positive cost implications of some of those above the x-axis categories? Are you able to reflect kind of those, those dependencies in a chart like this, do you think?
So if I'm following your question, sorry, are you asking, are we going to have a,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so like if we implemented pricing, we would, we could impact sort of traveler behavior and, impact sort of GHG sort of that way, but we could also generate revenue in which we could use that revenue to invest in some of these more cost intensive strategies to bring those costs down, is essentially what I'm saying is. So how easy is it to reflect kind of those dynamics in a chart like this? And so,
yeah, that's really interesting. So I think this would probably better serve as a guide for you or others to see where you could invest that revenue. So I think this is too much of a snapshot in terms of seeing, these are some of the actions that you could generate revenue by, perhaps, depending, again, this isn't for Oregon at this point, and get a better sense of what are those more cost intensive actions. So I don't think in this iteration that feedback loop would really work, but I will say that we have interest from others to generate a 2.0. It's difficult, as I'm sure you understand, when you go through a project like this, the process is as valuable, and we want to make sure, things are just changing so quickly that it's updated. So maybe that would be part of the evolution of the information. But I think it's probably safest for me to say that that would not be a part of what we can produce this year. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Tara, so you've got a question there.
I think you're on mute.
Yes, that pesky thing. So piggybacking on what Chris said, this is where I struggle with these MAC curves, right? And I think we've talked about this, Maya, that's why you have this sort of scenario analysis separate, because for pricing, what is the price, right? This is like return for spending on something, and there's not that much spending, although we have to put, toll gantries and things like that, there's not as much spending. So it's a challenge to put policies in here, and we're finding policies are some of the most effective things that we can do if we have the political will to do them and towards as to reaching these goals. But I think you're doing the scenario analysis as well, which allows you to get to some of those. So wanted to clarify that for this audience. The other connection I wanted to make is I think you guys spoke with the Oregon Global Warming Commission yesterday, and some of the questions that came up around population forecasts in Metro. Chris Johnson is probably a really good connection for you to make sure you're doing right by those population forecasts in Portland, because they're a little bit different than the PSU forecasts.
Oh yes, thank you, Tara, for connecting those dots. And there are multiple threads that I'm on today about those population forecasts. So we'll absolutely, we have a nice to-do list to circle back on some of those information sources. So definitely doing due diligence there. And
right. And I think this crowd really appreciates, I know Brian Dunn and I have had lots of conversation about trying to keep up with all the crazy vehicle and fuel regulations and rule changes and such, that you definitely got an earful of some of those yesterday. So the ink's not even dry on some of them, and we need to be, reporting out to people what the impacts are. So.
Like the infrastructure bill, et cetera.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, definitely exciting time.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Maya from anyone? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you, Maya. We appreciate the presentation. It'll be interesting to see how some of this work plays out for you in the future. Tara, did you have one last thing?
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to make a positive announcement on this front with those vehicles and fuels. So we had this goal of the governor to pass 50,000 electric vehicles registered in the DMV, light duty vehicles. And I'm pretty sure we passed that in the last probably month or so. I know that was supposed to be in 2020. We're now in 2022. But we're on our way, and I think you can't pick up a paper anymore without reading that we're moving in that direction. So just want to share that.
That's nice.
Really exciting. Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have Cody. You're up with the climate friendly and equitable community efforts.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So I'm Cody Meyer. I'm a land use transportation planner with DLCD. Know a lot of you from these meetings back in the before times when we were all the COG office. So yeah, just want to give you an update on the climate friendly equitable rulemaking. I feel like most people are kind of aware of what's been happening. It's about 2 years old now, but I'm going to kind of quickly run through just some kind of background stuff just for anyone who doesn't. So apologies to those of you who have seen this presentation like 15 times. So, okay, so first off, this is a part of the 4-agency effort, Every Mile Counts, to implement the statewide transportation strategy and the work that we've been doing with DEQ, ODOT, and Department of Energy. And the efforts here are, this is climate friendly equitable communities is one of the many efforts in this multi-agency collaborative, and it's under the local greenhouse gas planning. it's a pretty big multi-pronged effort. So first of all, DLCD is leading it. We're working in close cooperation with ODOT through that partnership of Every Mile Counts. It's making proposed rule amendments to 3 divisions of our administrative rulebook. So housing rules, transportation planning rules, and our metropolitan greenhouse gas reduction targets. So our packets are really big and really dense. There's there's about over 100 pages of administrative rule revisions that are going to the commission. Just by way of background, we're only proposing rule amendments for the metropolitan areas of the state. We use this slide every time we talk because we still get incoming mail from Ontario or someone asking us to come out, and why aren't we talking to them? So our greenhouse gas reduction rule targets in Division 44 are set for the metropolitan areas of the state. I don't need to tell you all that this is the biggest bang for the buck. This is like, I think it's 70% now of the state's population. I'm trying to get some updated numbers, but the last I knew it was like 65% of the state's population lives in one of these metropolitan areas. And I think it's like close to 70% works there. So a lot of bang for the buck. And we've been really busy. We've been doing this since, technically we've been at every commission meeting since 2019. And we've been doing kind of active work since March of 2020 with the executive order on climate. We spent a lot of time scoping this effort and doing interviews with stakeholders and surveys. We did kind of a very diverse rulemaking advisory committee this time. We have 40 people, and a lot of them are community members with zero knowledge of planning or modeling or administrative rule language and how that connects to their daily lives. So we spent a really significant portion of the rulemaking just trying to kind of build capacity and talk in everyday terms and get to kind of concepts of what folks wanted to see. Then we really bombarded the RAC with detailed draft language. We then kind of went out and talked to the public in workshops and practitioner meetings with our local government partners. I think the last count was we're up to over 140 public facing meetings that we've held all over the state via Zoom or Teams. And we're here in 2022, we're in the adoption phase. We've had our first session, the formal adoption hearings have started. So we're actually in rulemaking now, technically, although we've been doing it for a number of years. So we've had the first public hearing with the commission, got a bunch of feedbacks for revisions, and we'll be going back to them in end of May. So I'll put some information on that in a second. Yeah, in this side, we're working on implementation to try to stand up some of the work or be ready to stand it up. So working closely with ODOT to get funding for the plan amendments that are going to have to happen. DLCD has a budget request that we got some money to do some of the zoning work, the initial zoning work and community engagement planning work for the affected jurisdictions. So we're kind of getting contracts ready to go in a parallel track here. Oh, that was fancy. Yeah, so the charge from our commission was into 2 categories. So one was require the climate-friendly, equitable land use, transportation, and planning regulations. Those are mostly the TPR. And then 2 is we had the required planning to meet the targets. And in the TPR, the planning regulations, really just kind of looking at like, how are we doing planning for land use and transportation? We're building on existing rules. We're not making up a lot of stuff from whole cloth. We're just kind of strengthening what was there in large part. And we're looking at taking action immediately or as soon as possible. One of the things we're really running into is trying to work with local partners and trying to be aggressive and ambitious, but also trying to be workable and make it folks able to implement it. So we're really balancing those 2 needs right now and refining rules based on that feedback. So the rules just previously, I'll just say the TPR has had some issues in the metropolitan areas where it had some unclear direction. It was MPOs, metropolitan areas, cities, counties, local jurisdictions. It was kind of a grab bag of who the regulation applied to. So we are taking a very conscious effort now to say, these rules apply to the cities and counties. Some of the rules require them to work regionally, but ultimately it is their responsibility, and that's within the authority of the commission to write planning regulations for those jurisdictions. So the 6 focus areas are the land use planning. Climate friendly areas is the name of what is essentially just trying to get a 30% of zoned capacity for higher dense mixed walkable areas in each jurisdiction. So that's tied to the statewide transportation strategy goal. Looking at high quality bike and pedestrian and transit infrastructure, limiting the minimum off-street parking mandates. So you can still build parking if you own a property, just asking that governments kind of limit the amount that they're asking or making folks build. Limiting the use of motor vehicle congestion standards, and some direction on prioritization and project selection. And then a little bit of stuff on EV charging, which was kind of pared down due to some of the authority issues we ran into. So as I said, the TPR has been around for about 30 years. It's had a lot of direction for coordinated land use and transportation planning. We know we need to do more, so we're building on that foundation. We're really, I think, as a state, a lot better off than some of the other areas in the country who are undertaking this work, because we've had growth boundaries, we've had efficiency measures, we've had the TPR. So we're really just trying to build on that strength. Key area of the new rules for transportation planning rules are to really look deeply at modal plans. So there's a series of rules. I think it starts in rule 500 and all the way up to 800 to kind of direct how transportation system plans need to focus in on these different modal elements before doing a combined project list. And really, it's just looking at how do we get to a connected, safe, complete networks for each mode, and not kind of focusing in too deeply on any one mode, but we need to have a plan at least to make sure that we're building very safe, connected networks. And then we really have these prioritization frameworks throughout the plans. Is, you know, we want to make sure we're putting investment in climate friendly areas where we want to see more housing developed there, and we want to see a lot of multimodal infrastructure being built to serve those folks so they don't have to drive a car. We also are trying to make some restorative investment in neighborhoods that have been underserved in the past. And we want to look at, in a TSP, looking to where are the key destinations that folks need to get to in the city. So then you can kind of tie that into those modal access there. So the prioritization framework is really set to say cities and counties are going to have to start looking at selecting project based on their ability to reduce carbon emission, to increase equitable outcomes. And we want to make sure that we're measuring success in a way that is a little bit more broad than I think a lot of cities have done in the past. So kind of not outlawing V over C or LOS, but just saying that folks, you need to take another look at that and say you can use 2 different standards when you're doing land use applications to look at what the impacts are, maybe on V over C, but maybe on the amount of driving that's coming out of a development as well. Our Division 44 greenhouse gas reduction targets have been around for about a little over a decade now. So we didn't do a whole lot of work technically under the hood on these. We basically just rolled out the requirements to say, in the past, Metro had to do the planning to achieve the target as a region. We've rolled that down to the next 2 largest metropolitan areas in the state. So building on Eugene Springfield's plan that they did in 2015 and working with them to create rules to say, like, you can adopt that plan, you have the plan, and to get the missing ingredients to get it adopted locally in their local TSPs or comp plans. And then also to do scenario planning for the Salem-Keizer metropolitan area. So as I mentioned, we're kind of at the 11th hour here. We've had our first public hearing. We got, I think, over 45 pieces of testimony, some of which are like 30+ pages long with very detailed guidance. So it's kind of like co-writing a a research paper with 150 different partners. So we're really going in there and taking all this great input that we're receiving and making amendments and trying to find issues before we go back to the commission in, it'll be May 19th, I believe, will be the adoption hearing. So if they do adopt the rules, the effective date, we're looking at probably late June, somewhere in there, and working with ODOT to get an implementation plan together. You can find that on the commission's website in their March packet, but I think the kind of key actions that we see coming out of the gate first are working with the metropolitan regions and the cities and counties to help them set performance measures and targets for actions to reduce climate emission, and then do some parking reform in a couple different phases. And then we are working diligently on getting the climate friendly area mapping and designation studies, which will happen in 2 phases, but we're working hard on getting the first phase of that up in the next year. So with that, I will turn it to you all to see if there's any questions I can try to answer.
All right, any questions for Cody? That's a lot to cover, so. Let's see, I don't see any questions yet, Cody. Have you given much thought to what kind of guidance and things you might be working on over the next, probably it'll take some time and be a little bit circular, I'm thinking, but maybe over the next couple of years that might involve some of the OMSC group and crowd?
Well, we're giving a lot of thought to the guidance, so we know that we're going to be working really hard just starting the summer to put that out there. We've got actually a contract. I just saw the sign off on today to have a guidance document put together for the land use planning aspect to guide cities and counties to do the climate friendly area zoning in the study. So that was pretty good to get that up and going. But yeah, that's just a drop in the bucket. We're going to need guidance for all this stuff. So yeah, I think as far as this group, I will be looking to ODOT. I know I've been talking with Tara and folks over there to say, okay, there's a lot of things we got to think about, and I'll be looking to ODOT to try to lead on that effort of like, what are those like modeling guidance. One thing came up through a conversation, I think it was last week, or it's been a running conversation online, is having some peer exchange workshops on sharing some of the stuff, particularly around performance standards and some of the work that Portland is doing, Eugene is doing, based upon the SB 743 VMT reduction law that passed in California a number of years ago, and just looking at different, building on the metro mobility study, what are the different alternatives that are legally defensible for folks to use. And so I think that that's one that is really on my mind, that I want to make sure we're getting some of that stuff at least talked about in the near term, so we can try to start wrapping our head around what we need to do to support governments.
Yeah, I think that's going to be, it looked like an OMUD conversation in a few months around some of that stuff. And I know California does use VC, LOS, et cetera, a lot. It's kind of like Oregon, where you have different contexts. They're using different things and making different types of decisions. So CEQA does their thing with VMT, but for a project to be identified, evaluated, et cetera, they still have a lot of other measures they use, as you can imagine. So I think people get a lot of that stuff mixed up. And one of the things I keep thinking about for this group, and it kind of relates to, probably almost, maybe it's been 10 years ago when we were doing the climate smart stuff in Metro, and they were using Envision Tomorrow and some of these other things, is when you start looking at CFAs and some of these different development patterns, how do you decide what demographic to allocate into these different areas? So that's an area I think would be really good to get some guidance and some thought around, because the demographic piece it's really important, not only as we do more equity analysis, but making sure we're matching those housing things up. And that would be good to get guidance and agreement on what people were doing for the modeling scenarios. So that's an area I think that I would see the OMSC engaging pretty heavily in moving forward.
Yeah, and to that point, I just want to add, we're working with Oregon Housing Community Services on this anti-displacement gentrification toolkit, which has a number. We have a mapping tool that we're putting together to support this work that really looks like a lot of demographic data points from the census that kind of heighten your risk of displacement. So that could be, and we're really working with that agency to say, hey, like, let's try to make sure we're funding affordable housing in good, safe, walkable neighborhoods instead of making them exclusive enclaves. We want to be making sure they're accessible to all. So that could be an interesting tie-in to that.
Yeah, I think that would certainly hopefully all work together. You know, that's where I was thinking that might be a good OMSC topic to bring all the agencies together to say, let's make sure we're kind of at least all on the same playing field there. So great. Okay, Jeffrey, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and thank you, Cody. Just had a question about all those public meetings. What was the public's tenor and feelings about all of this? Like, I'm just really curious as to how it's landing with the public out there.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. I will say when we did our workshops regionally in all the regions, we heard just a huge amount of push for more, and just to do more on climate, to do more for housing and transportation choice. It's interesting to hear the kind of different takes from different regions, but I mean, in Southern Oregon, they're like, this is a really scary situation down here with the fires, and the climate is the top of their mind, and the housing crisis down there. And we have gotten pushback, I'll say. There on the other side, you have folks like the home builders or the realtors who, frankly, have a vested financial stake in a certain product that they don't want to see let go. So they're very concerned that, more multifamily housing could affect their bottom line. It's my personal take on that. And you have, some neighborhood associations in Bend engaging and, concerned about having upzoning near their houses. So, but for the most part, I would say probably like over 90% of the public input we've received is very much supportive, and every local government has submitted testimony that says we're supportive with the outcomes of what the rulemaking is trying to achieve. Though we may have issues with different means to get there, we all want to move to the same, place. We want climate friendly and equitable communities.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Natalie.
Hi, Cody. This is Natalie Lillienwall at ODOT, and I guess your presentation made me think about the Interstate Bridge project and all of the rules that are going in place. How would they affect the traffic modeling, and how soon would the traffic modeling be updated to reflect those changes?
Okay, that's a good question. If there is an acknowledged plan and a project in that plan, I don't think that should affect the traffic modeling of that project. So, to my mind, it's really looking at, as we make new plan amendments going forward, we're adding, here's what we want to see those look like. So a lot of it is aimed at the systems level.
Okay.
But I mean, if we have like a specific on that, we could definitely sit down with you and Bill Holmstrom from DLCD would probably be the right person to talk about that corner of the rules.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I guess, yeah, it's a good process question, and I know enough about all those things to be a little dangerous. So maybe the question would be, I think for sort of the legal context, if I understand it right, you would have to go through the process, get those land use changes adopted into the plan, and then we would figure out I imagine there's going to be some overlap to try to make some of this streamlined as much as possible, Cody. But then once those are adopted, then they can be used for the transportation system planning efforts, et cetera. So it'll probably, depending on the area and when they make those changes, and it'll be probably a couple of years, Natalie, before I'm guessing you would see that.
Yeah, and I'm just, the general context of the planning system in Oregon is that you do the planning and it's approved, and then it's kind of, you're ready to go, right? It's not the development review rule, it's the planning rules to make sure we think about the connections, and we put the forethought in there, and then once it's acknowledged and adopted, yeah. So, but if there's a specific, we could definitely follow up with you on that.
Yeah. And that wouldn't, of course, wouldn't impact the Washington side of the interstate bridge project. So,
well, you can't build half the bridge.
You could, but all right, great. Any other questions for Cody? It's been a long road, and it's a long road yet to go, I think. So. All right, thanks for.
Well, I appreciate it, and yeah, well, I look forward to circling back and having some more conversations on guidance and stuff with you all.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how that morphs and over time. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
And let's see, Carol.
Right.
Do you have? Yes.
Right. So I don't know how I got the time so off this time, but we are way ahead of schedule, almost a half an hour. And I emailed Karen. She did send me a note earlier today to say she's having some network issues too. It's just the day for that.
Mm-hmm.
I have her slides, but she's not on yet. So I would propose that we do something a little special, if that's okay with you, Brian, and just take a brief break here and turn the floor over to Alex Bettinardi for a few minutes. He's got something to say.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, thanks. I don't know, Becky, did you want to introduce first, or I can jump in as well?
Yes, Alex, I have prepared something that I wish to share just to introduce your topic. But I need to do it effectively, which I'm not doing yet. Okay, so first I got to figure out the screen share. Sorry, I did this morning for some reason. When it comes to Zoom, my brain just kind of goes blank. Okay. Now you can see everybody, which I'll get out of the way here.
Don't look, Brian, it's supposed to be a surprise to you. So.
It is?
That's what I used to like before I had this.
All right. So now everything's all messed up from my previous problems online. So I got to reorganize myself here. I'm butchering it. Okay. Let's see. Problem is when I start sharing, then the whole thing just takes over my machine and I can't see anything that I need to see. Again. Okay. So you guys are still not seeing the right one. Boy, Alex, okay, I think I might give up on the slideshow and just talk. Because I had funny slides, but if you can't see them, it doesn't work. So the theme is, and now for something completely different. So just channel your inner John Cleese sitting at his desk on the edge of the ocean. We're here to talk about Brian Dunn. He's a man who graduated from Oregon State University in 1992, and he began his career with ODOT through an engineering program where people are allowed to explore different areas of the agency in 4 different offices. So Brian took advantage of this, everything's changing on me, program, and he explored the agency. And he chose, of all places to work, TPOW, the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit. And when he started with us, he served on the planning analysis team for 10 years. During this time, he worked on a large variety of things, ranging from project design analysis to developing the first Salem travel demand model, of all things. After 10 years in this role, Brian took on the responsibility of managing TPOW. His unique perspective, philosophy, and experience made him very effective in this position. He has dual bachelor's degrees, one in civil engineering and the other in forestry engineering. So in Brian's case, he can literally see the forest through the trees and from a 20,000 foot level as well, like a drone hovering over everybody. But Brian can comfortably shift between short-term, long-term perspectives, statewide, regional, county, city, and then at the facility level, which is really helpful and I think necessary to be effective as a unit in the work that we do. And I have to tell you, Brian established a tradition in our unit for years past. When someone has a milestone event, he loves to share trivia related to your special year. So here's, Brian, is your special year trivia. I'll start with 2002. That's when you became the manager for TPOW, which will now end with 20 years of service. In 2002, the prime rate was 4.25%. More interesting, the price of gold for an ounce was $343. Only $343. A gallon of gas averaged $1.61 a gallon. A loaf of bread cost $1.39. And 1 pound of bananas cost 33 cents. The New England Patriots were the Super Bowl champs. Anaheim Angels won the World Series. Detroit Red Wings clinched the Stanley Cup. And our very own Katie Harmon of Gresham, Oregon, won the Miss America crown. And the top 3 best-selling cars were the Toyota Camry, the Honda Accord, and the Ford Taurus. All 3 of which you still see on the road, probably a 2002 model, because they last forever. And finally, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated 50 years on the throne, and yet she's still here with us 20 years later. So seriously, Brian is a collaborative person, holds very strong beliefs in the power of teams, especially interagency collaboration. Initially, Brian had Bill Upton to manage the ODOT travel modeling program, including the OMSC part of it. But when Bill retired, the position was lost. But Brian made it very clear the value added by this group is worth the time and the resources. He has been the major champion of using the OMSC over the last years, anticipating the need for agency alignment far in advance of the need becoming apparent to others, including staff. For example, we followed a collaborative approach for collecting the household travel survey together under the OMSC in 2009, 2011. And we're doing it again for this survey this year and early next. Brian also pays close attention to process and understands how analysis fits into the process. Without an effective process, analysis easily becomes irrelevant. And we've seen this time and time again. So this was one of my biggest lessons that I got from Brian over the years. Brian, your guidance, mentoring, wisdom, foresight will be greatly missed. And while we have not hired a replacement yet, whoever takes on this role will have pretty big shoes to fill. I really wanted to end this talking about Brian's wonderful sense of humor, including puns, but I don't have examples because I detest puns because my husband loves them too. So I don't have puns, but I do have pictures. I really want to share pictures because when you're the manager in this unit, you have to be prepared for torture.
Yeah, that's true.
Sure, we did. I don't know, Alex, if you can access any photos. We've got one that's just amazing. Just got to figure out how to share my screen properly.
Maybe Carol has a tip on that.
Yeah. Maybe I can just do it. I'll just do it this way. That's pretty good. I have no idea what you guys are seeing right now. What are you seeing? Oh, there we go. This is Brian. He's coming to work. He's going to his office. Oh, wait, his office is covered in newspaper. What's going on? Oh, wait, this is what the inside of his office looked like when he came in. It is completely filled with newspaper that's bunched up and thrown and covering everything. Maybe not quite his chair, but it's pretty deep, you can tell. Brian's pretty tall, right? I'm sure you remember Brian. And then there, of course, it draws a crowd. So anyone who has a sense of humor and can survive 20 years leading a bunch of chuckleheads, as we were once called by a manager in another part of the agency, you have to have some fun while you do a lot of work, a lot of hard work. And that is what we got to do under Brian. But yet, wait, there's more. And this is when I turn it over to Alex Bettinardi.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Becky. So I just wanted to spend a couple minutes recognizing the leadership that Brian has provided to me, and then open it up to anyone else here that would like to share an anecdote or two about Brian. Real quick, since I've been 14, I've been lucky enough to have pretty good managers along the way, with a couple of very short-lived exceptions to that. But of all the managers that I've had, most of which were very enjoyable to work with, Brian is hands down been the best. And so lucky for me, I've been able to work with this great manager and mentor for basically all of my professional career. Here's just a couple of some examples of Brian's qualities that I've been able to benefit from. Brian's always working to build his staff up and find their strengths and play to those. He's always mentoring and providing opportunities for those working with him. Anyone who has known me throughout my career may have noticed a softening or a rephrasing in some of my interactions. Basically, me putting my foot in my mouth less than I do. And if you have been observing that trend, you have to know that 99% of that improvement is due to Brian, for sure. And Brian is also always supporting the team and the program in a variety of conversations and venues. And as Becky mentioned, that also includes strong support and backing of the OMSC throughout his career. So being an analytical engineer, I wanted to test, kind of my own, this personal, sorry, now I have having the same struggles there with getting the screen to share. So being an analytical engineer, I wanted to test whether or not I was just wearing rose-colored glasses, or if Brian is really indeed one of the greatest leaders of all time. So I wanted to share my analysis. The slides are coming through, right? So first off, Brian is Martin Luther King Jr. Best mustache. So do the quantitative non-biased analysis, and indeed it is Brian who wins the best. Best puns versus Abraham Lincoln, another great leader. Brian gets better puns than Abraham Lincoln. Best hat versus Napoleon. Let's see. Brian. Oh no, wait, that one's Napoleon. Napoleon gets best hat. Although, as I think about it, Napoleon wasn't really that great of a leader, so I don't think best hat is a great way to judge whether or not someone's a great leader. So calm and understanding versus Steve Jobs. Brian gets that one as well. Best at considering safety versus Elon Musk. We got Brian comes up again. Best at tactical maneuvers versus Winston Churchill. Brian. And fastest on a tricycle versus Gandhi. And we have Brian as well. So as you can see, I'm not biased, and Brian is obviously one of the world's top leaders. And so that's what I got. And we want to turn the mic over to anyone else that wants to share a quick story or anecdote.
Okay, I'll probably start, take a minute. So it has been such a pleasure for working, Brian, with you and with the whole TPAP team since I joined PSU like more than 10 years ago now. That is such a pleasure. You were sorely missed. From my perspective, from the team here at PSU by many people, I think. And personally, I'm grateful that you have been so supportive from when I was a junior faculty at PSU. The letter you write, support for my tenure case only carry a lot of weight among my colleagues, judge my value to PSU and to the overall modeling community here at Oregon. So yeah, I'm certainly very grateful, and certainly echo many of the those not aware of some of those fun caveats and so on. But one thing probably Carol certainly can speak to that. So when I am not aware of all the kind of your retirement and whatnot. When I got the email from the OMAC mailing list, essentially looking for your replacement. I sent Carol email say, is Brian got promoted or something? Carol responds say, okay, you are retiring. I respond, look too young to retire to me. Certainly, I hope I can have many more years to collaborate with you, but yeah, certainly best luck with your retirement.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll jump in, and I said something similar this morning, but I'll share it with the folks who weren't at the OM or the meeting this morning. But I think, Brian, first of all, thanks for really contributing sort of I think to the culture of modeling Oregon. And I don't say that lightly. I think the OMSC, is a pretty special creation, pretty special group, and for those of you who've been around, this is really the exception. If you look across the nation, it's sort of how the modeling community collaborates here. And so I think, Brian, you should be obviously very proud of that legacy. And again, just thanks for all your contributions and helping to create the school thing that we've had here. So,
yeah, thanks.
Trails, my friend.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll help carry that on, as you step into this role for a while as chair, moving on here.
Tara, did you have something to add? And Brian, I'll just note that our third speaker is on the line now. So
great.
I just wanted to say one more quick thing, because as we talk about equity in the our parlance now with a lot of that we're doing, I mean, Brian really represents a lot of that. I think the group within TPAO is pretty diverse, and he's always there coaching people and thinking of their strengths and their best ability and bringing that out. And I think it's a testimony to all of us having been there for quite some time, and how well that's worked and how much we relish that. Certainly I learned my agency hat, so to speak, staying in my lane, all those kind of things as I moved over from private to public. So Brian, I can't say enough about how I'm echoing Alex there, like you've left your marks on all of us that will try to carry on in your footsteps. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Tara.
And Brian, I said something this morning too, but I'll just add that I go back all the way to '93 with my agency, and starting off as a modeler and using QRS2. I think it was called QRS2.
Yeah.
And so you've seen all the development come all these years, and it's a testament to you and your department and your great staff that you keep pushing the envelope and trying to make modeling both at ODOT but everywhere better and better. And I just want to commend you for that. And I like what you said this morning that we have to enjoy our work, you know, we have to enjoy it in order to try to excel at it. So it's a good thing to remember. Maybe they should put that up as a plaque over the doorway after you leave to remind people, if you're passing through this doorway, you know, enjoy your work and do a good job. And those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
best of luck, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right. Well, thank you all. I appreciate that. And we will move on to our third presentation on employee commute options with, is Karen Font-Williams, are you gonna be doing that presentation?
I am.
All right.
I am here now. Sounds like I'm audible.
Yes, you are. Yeah. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, you are very welcome. And thanks for sharing my slides. That definitely makes things a little bit simpler. So for those of you who don't know me, and I think that's many of you, I've never spoken before this group before. I am an air quality planner at Oregon DEQ in the air quality planning section. And this rulemaking, or really this project that I'm going to be talking about with you today, came about from the cross-agency work of the Department of DEQ, Land Conservation and Development, ODOT, of course, and the Department of Energy. And that was around the Every Mile Counts effort, and putting forward projects and rulemakings regarding reducing emissions from transportation, and things that could be done relatively, not necessarily simply, but things that didn't require new legislation, and that each of our agencies had the ability and the authority to do. So that's how this project came to be, and it came to land with me, and I'll be the lead rule writer and kind of project manager of getting this rulemaking underway. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. So I'm sure many of you are aware that Oregon has a mandatory employee commute options program underway, and it's been in place for about 20 years, a little more than 20 years, since 1996 in the Portland metropolitan area. This program requires employers that have more than 100 employees at a work site to offer commuting options to their employees. And the particular requirements of the employers are to survey their employees about how they get to work, and then to report to DEQ on, before they report to DEQ, the employers have to provide DEQ a transportation plan, or really a commute reduction plan. So a series of incentives that they will offer their employees to get to work by some other means than driving alone. And then they need to report to DEQ every 2 years about how they are doing meeting a reduction target, which is 10% below their baseline or their first survey. So this is just a map that shows where those employers are located across the Portland region, and about the color coding that just kind of gives you a picture, an idea of how the size range of those employers shakes out. And let's see, I guess that I would also just mention on this slide that just emphasize that the rule does not require employers to have particular incentives. What they choose for their commute option or their transportation reduction plan is up to them. They just need to have one, basically. And there also isn't a requirement that they attain that 10% reduction. That is not an enforceable provision of the rule. It's just having the plan and doing the survey and making a good faith effort to implement it. Okay, next slide, please. So one of the first questions that I had at the beginning of starting this work was, really how much, more or less, of pollution emissions, transportation emissions can we attribute to the commuter, the average commuter? And so I asked one of our modelers, air quality modelers at DEQ, whose specialty is transportation emissions and running moves and so forth, and ask James to help me kind of ballpark this so I could essentially provide some information in another presentation I was doing last year. So coming up with ultimately what, the magic answer was 37%, but involved a lot of assumptions, obviously. So it's a relatively simplistic calculation, but I think it still gives kind of a good idea. Like this is not an insubstantial amount of pollution emissions that could be coming from people driving back and forth to work. And so we started with just on-road vehicle emissions on a weekday. Again, this is all tailored to the Portland metro region. Separated out emissions from passenger cars and freight cars, then separated out weekdays and weekends, and then made a very not rash assumption, but very an assumption that we would just look at the rush hour traffic, essentially, that sort of 7-ish in the morning and 5-ish in the afternoon. And based on the vehicle miles traveled at that time, James ran the numbers, and it came out to be that was about 37% of the greenhouse gas emissions that were being emitted in that, from transportation in that time frame was coming from folks presumably driving back and forth to work. Next slide, please. So after 20 years, again, of running this program, we can pretty confidently state that the program has helped to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants too, which I'll talk about in a minute. And, again, I'll rephrase that slightly. Instead of saying reduce and say really prevent, because this is, again, about emissions that never happen, right? Because people are leaving their cars at home. And I'll talk again in just a second about how we come up with this number, but for 2019, the year before the world fell apart, well, the world was falling apart in 2019 too, but before the pandemic anyway, and all the effects that had on transportation, the calculations that we do in the employee commute option program showed that somewhere in the neighborhood of 36,000 metric tons of CO2 were being kept out of the atmosphere, let's say, from this program, from people having incentives to take other means to get to work besides driving their car. So that sounds great, and it is great, but what are the assumptions that go, what are the assumptions behind those calculations? So the first is that we base that on the number of employers that reported that year. And because we have biennial reporting, that probably represents about half of the employers. There's about 1,000 total employers in the Portland metro region, and about 500-ish of them reported in 2019. So right there, that's maybe only half of what was actually prevented in terms of emissions. Second thing is that we are making an assumption about what a commute length would be, and we take that from the metro area household survey. So the average commute length we're assuming in our calculations is 19.6 miles. We're assuming that someone is driving, or I should say commuting to work 250 days in a year. And when you chunk those numbers out, the vehicle miles, I'll say reduced or prevented, is 74 million vehicle miles that were not driven in that year, 2019. And then we use emission factors in terms of how many gallons of fuel that would have been, and then by pollutant, how many, what is the pollutant content of a gallon of fuel, and come up with, in this one instance, the 36,000 metric tons of CO2, but there are obviously calculations that go along with volatile organics and NOx and other constituents that we can calculate as well. Okay, quickly, I'll move on to the next slide. And I just want to give a nod to the other pollutants besides greenhouse gases that are being, again, not emitted because of this program. And this is part of a different analysis that was done a couple of years ago in the Technical Services Department of DEQ. And just to show what some of the toxic air contaminant benefits of having ECO are, models were run having ECO in place and not having ECO in place. And we just learned that tens to hundreds of tons of a number of air toxics were also not being emitted because employee commute options is in place. So important program, definitely. We're deriving good air quality benefits from having it. So the next question, and that would be the next slide. If we were to expand the such a mandatory employer-based commute option program beyond Portland, how big is the problem elsewhere? What gains might we see for air quality in other parts of the state? And this is just, again, a very simple graph from based on data from the American Community Survey that shows, not surprisingly, that in these particular counties that I chose to look at, that a large majority of commuters in urban and urbanized and suburbanized areas and other parts of the state, large majorities of folks are driving their own car to their jobs. And this is based on, just as a matter of clarity, based on, let's see, workers that are 16 and over and their journey to work. So that's the American Community Survey data that I looked at to generate this graph. And then next slide, please. Should be the map of Eugene. And so how might we bring some of the benefits of commute options programming to other parts of the state? What should we be considering as we're doing this rulemaking? I mean, we certainly know from, again, ECO having operated in the Portland area for a couple of decades, from the transportation option program that ODOT runs. And I've been working really closely with Stephanie Millar over the past year or so. We know there are huge benefits even aside from air quality, right? In terms of potential economic benefits to employers themselves in terms of, promoting themselves as good places to work, having their employees be have a better work-life balance and being healthier and having more relaxing ways to get to work than necessarily duking it out on the freeway in bumper to bumper traffic. So that's great. But we also are pretty confident that we can bring air quality benefits to other parts of Oregon as well. And how would we design and develop the rules to support such a statewide program? Ideally, that it would be one that supports good programs that are already in place. I'll talk about that in a second, and really meets the local, both transportation and environmental needs and goals of those communities, as well as helping workers get to work more easily and more conveniently, which is really probably the biggest motivator for employers to want to sign on, shall we say, to a program like this. So, and at the end of the day, it would be a new regulatory program and new regulations. So we need to be thinking about geographic applicability. Would it apply, and would the employers to be regulated be, would we use that same 100 employee threshold? Would it just apply to employers that are within a metropolitan planning organization, or, an urbanized area? Even with that would be a lot. If we were to have the applicability be to employers of 100 or more employees at a work site in metropolitan planning area boundaries, that would be about 600-ish more employers that would be now regulated under a commute option program. As I mentioned, there's about 1,000 in the Portland area. So it's not exponential, but it's also not insignificant to think about managing a program. It's kind of more or less kind of doubling the size of it. And thinking about like the reduction target. So 10% is what applies in the Portland area. Is that the right number, right? I mean, not that there's necessarily one right number, but would that be a reasonable target to apply in different areas of the state? Just as an example, something to think about, Washington's commute reduction rule, the jurisdictions themselves, or I should say the areas in which the regulation applies, set their own targets for reduction, and they need to be at least as stringent as the state target, but they can set other targets as well. So, just some different ways that the program could be designed. Okay, next slide, please. And I just would like to make the point with this slide that as we are developing the rules for a statewide program, that we have a lot of goals in mind. And perhaps the most fundamental of which is creating something that builds on the success, knowing that there are many transportation option programs operating throughout the state, again, supported by, guided by, under the technical advisement of the ODOT Transportation Options Program. And ideally, DEQ's rule would complement and support the work that's already going on. And we also want to make sure that as we're developing this rule, that it's informed by really all the actors that are portrayed in this slide, but particularly the employers that would be regulated, community-based organizations that are advocating for transportation and environmental justice, and the workers themselves, right, that have needs about getting to work safely, conveniently, having a good work-life balance, and being, health benefits being supported. And I don't think I need to belabor the point, but just that, it's perhaps, when it's written down on paper, it won't look all that complicated, but I think keeping all the goals in mind that we want to be able to achieve with this is going to make it a bit of I think a very kind of a fun exercise, but also, I want to be sure that we are being methodical and listening, right, to the various stakeholders that are going to be affected by this. Okay, next slide. So having said all that, DEQ has been, thinking and envisioning ways that the current eco rules can be enhanced and strengthened in the Portland area, and some elements that we probably would want to carry forward to a statewide rule. It's, again, it's not going to be a cookie cutter, one size fits all. But one of the ideas that we've had about certain practices to incorporate into a new rule, as well as enhancing the existing rule is to collect more geographic information and have a better understanding about, and perhaps that's through surveys, perhaps that, well, I'll talk about in the next slide about other places we might get that information, but trying to have a better understanding of where people are traveling from and what the transportation options available to them are in those locations. That is going to be very different, obviously, in the Portland area than it is in other parts of the state. We may be looking at travel information, by census block or by zip code, or be asking employers to supply that information or ask their employees. It would probably have to be voluntarily shared, right, where they're traveling from. But that could tell us a lot. And another way we're thinking of enhancing current Portland rules, as well as bringing this forward to a statewide rule, would be setting some particular standards for what a transportation option plan that an employer submits. It needs to meet a certain threshold. And again, not planning on mandating particular practices or incentives, but perhaps like assigning, let's say, a point value, knowing that certain incentives and transportation demand management strategies are a lot more effective than others. So paying people like by a subsidized transit pass, or by giving them the sort of cash equivalent of what a parking space would be worth at their work site, are very effective in getting people to leave their cars at home. And other strategies, maybe not so much. Just maybe installing a bike rack at the office is maybe not as an effective strategy. So anyway, with collecting a little bit more information, I think we can do a better job of certainly reducing emissions, but also communicating what the benefits of the program are. And the next slide, yep, there we go, is I hope this can be the start of a conversation with this group about the right ways to measure program effectiveness and how we can align how DEQ is measuring some of the effects of an eco program with how other agencies are measuring reduced emissions from transportation strategies and different kinds of planning. So I mentioned the assumptions that we make when I walked through the calculation to come up with the 36,000 tons of CO2 not emitted. And essentially those savings are based on emissions from burning emission factors saved from burning a gallon of fuel. And we'd likely want to either update emission factors to apply them in a statewide context, or at least make sure that among our agencies that we are using the same emission factors. If we're talking about this strategy reduces greenhouse gas by this much, that we're again using the same emission factors. Second thought, DEQ doesn't currently track mode splits in the eco program. We're just, based on the employer surveys, we're tracking the rate of single driver auto trips. So we don't really know like which methods are people using most in terms of other, active transportation and transit modes. So should we start tracking now? Should we start measuring how the different mode split works out over time or in different regions of the state? And at a minimum, for a statewide rule, we're going to need to make sure that inputs to models and calculations are right, representative, obviously, of that geographic area. And the obvious example is the commute length that we use from the household survey in Portland of 19.6 miles. We're going to need to use different commute lengths if we mimic that same sort of method of calculation, we're going to have regionally appropriate data to do that calculation. Maybe we can supplement employer information with other data sources like the ODOT and DLCD place type geographic information. Perhaps we can combine data sources to be able to tell a story about how effective transportation options and commute options are in different parts of the state, given the tools that people have in those areas. And how their commutes differ in those areas. And of course, there's lots of other ways that we can and other programs do demonstrate the effectiveness of their commute option program ordinances, calculating health benefits through the EPA Ben map, and being able to say in a dollar amount, this program saves this much of healthcare costs. We can do translations, I guess, into like traffic lanes that aren't needed, miles of congestion avoided. So there's lots of ways that we can communicate this information, but what's going to be the most effective in different parts of the state, and what would we have enough sort of data for to be able to give a credible measurement of whether or not this is working. So I would love to have input and ideas from all of you on measurement, how we measure success of this program, what kinds of data should we be collecting and asking for, and how can we make sure that all of our agencies are kind of comparing apples to apples when we're talking about reduction of transportation emissions from different transportation strategies. And then the next slide is just a bit of a timeline. We are going to be within the next few weeks, our advisory committee will be meeting. The poll just closed yesterday for trying to find a date for 20-some people to meet. It's going to be a big advisory committee. And the aim is to have draft rules for public notice in the fall. There will be a public hearing and opportunities for public comment, of course, and we hope to bring rules to our commission in early 2023, or Environmental Quality Commission. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or please feel free to follow up at my email address, and I'd love to talk with you more about this.
All right, great. Thanks for all that information, Karen. Does anybody have any either questions or maybe thoughts back to the performance measure monitoring questions that Karen had?
I had a quick comment, not so much a question, but I thought it was interesting how you were breaking apart travel into these different segments, and just an anecdote from work we've done. I was trying to pull it up while you're talking, but I couldn't quickly find it. But a lot of times people will talk about like the number of trips, and so I'm trying to remember some of the statistics, but I think it's something like 50% of the trips are 3 miles or less, or something like that. And so, like the point being, there's a really long tail, and I think that gets to what you're talking about, that commuting trips is just like this large percentage of the VMT, and they're not so much a huge percentage of the number of trips, but when you look at the miles that commute trips travel, it's a very large amount, a much bigger percentage than you would expect. So anyways, the numbers were aligning with my expectations. I just wanted to kind of say we've also looked at it from kind of trying to explain the difference between what a trip is versus the length of a trip.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for that. Thanks for that feedback.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Tara.
Yeah, Karen, great to have you here sharing this. I know it got pushed down the road a little bit, so glad to see a timeline here. I think that the one thing I didn't hear you mention that these people, I think is important, is the Get There tool, right? That is the new ride sharing app that replaces sort of the Drive Less, Save More, but it's like the new modern version that you can have on your cell phone and do a lot more things with it. And there's been talk that probably not requiring, but maybe make an easy glide slope. So that could be the reporting mechanism to help this. And that might make it easier to collect some of the data that you talked about. So then the thing I wanted to add in addition to that is in the list of things that you might do, I think the one thing that we're struggling with right now is that the diversity of people's vehicles is like, my neighbor might have an electric vehicle that he solar charges, and I'm driving a big SUV, whatever. So like, because we're in this environment, just assuming this average for residents that live in a certain area, could we just ask them for, make and model of their vehicle? That's, would help us some. VIN coding or VIN number is probably going to be too invasive, but maybe even just asking them for the MPG of their vehicle. Yeah, I don't know. So I feel like because it's so variable, that might be a piece of information we grab as well as the other things you mentioned. Definitely, it's been trip based, so moving to more detail so we can actually get the distance is key, and then knowing more about what mode options they have. So in support of all those other things, but adding the idea of tell us more about your vehicle.
Right on. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike.
Hi, Karen. And I will get back to you. I've been on vacation, so I haven't seen your emails or responded to your emails. I just got back today.
Good for you. I hope you had a great one.
Yeah. Well, this weather did not help. Anyway, I'm curious, what kind of discussion has there been already at the Environmental Quality Commission? Did they give any guidance? Have they had this topic brought to them to, start, or is this just so far at the staff level? And the EQC have they been, briefed about this coming rule? Because, these things can get quite controversial. People are concerned about their privacy and
sure.
And asking to have them have rules applied to them, et cetera, et cetera. So
it has not. We have not briefed the commission yet. So this has just been at the staff management level. And having said that, and Tara alluded to this, I started this project last year, and it got put on the back burner for some other policy work that needed to happen first. But I've made a good number of public presentations, so it's not a secret that DEQ is undertaking this work, but probably only the transportation wonks and active transportation advocates and stuff are paying attention. But having said all that, the answer is no. The EQC has not been briefed, and funny you should ask that, because just in the last couple of days, some emails came across my desk about doing just that and planning for a briefing to the commission. So soon, probably before the heat of summer, we'll have a few minutes before the EQC to kind of tell them what we're up to. And again, I mean, the rulemaking has been on the rulemaking agenda and the rulemaking calendar for some time, but that's not a place where many people would know to go looking. So, So yes, the controversy may be yet to come. Yes.
And I'm sure you've had your share of controversy with other rulemaking, not you personally, but the department this last 2 years. So you're used to controversy.
Somewhat. I mean, important work. People have very strong opinions about just pollution reduction is generally, people have very strong opinions about how to accomplish it, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yeah. Hey, Karen.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
I know you.
Hello, yes. You mentioned sort of offhand here just a few slides back about the need for emission factors that everybody could use, right? Were you asking for their creation because this group is going to be creating those. James is going to be creating those.
Oh, good. Yeah. So yeah, here's a great example of interagency, embarrassing on my part, lack of intersection communication. So the reason I brought it up here, Jeffrey, was really to make a plug for across agencies using either using the same emission factors or being clear about what emission factors we're using. And I say this as a planner, not as a modeler. So I may be, I'm obviously talking to a crew that my ignorance is going to be glaringly obvious, but I guess anecdotally, I have had, I'm under the impression and have had some cross-agency conversations about how we calculate things differently, and we use different assumptions and we use different model inputs. And both of us might be saying XYZ amount of pollution is being prevented by this program. And I was just advocating for across agencies, as much as we can be consistent in the inputs and the calculations and the emission factors that we are using in our models, so much the better. But and if we're not being consistent, that's okay. It's just we should know that, so that when we're explaining what our data means, we're being, I guess, fully transparent about that. So yeah, that's all I was getting at.
And I would agree, Jeffrey, that on average, we're getting it right. But my point was that this isn't an average, right? We are talking about individuals. Maybe you're at a firm and it only has 100 people. They may not be average. And so trying to get, something a little bit deeper than the emission rates, that yes, we are coordinating, and that's exciting. The other comment I had was wanting to open it up to this group to think a little bit about that target, right? I think you said like, is it 10% or something like this? Those discussions. I think that a lot of people in our plans don't do a lot with the travel demand management, or at least that's sort of my impression, that it's not often in our bread and butter of what we're doing in our travel model. So I don't know, I guess I wanted to open that here and see if people, did have thoughts on that, or, concerns or thoughts, or just where is that at? And do we need to do more of that, as a modeling group to start to get at some of these things? So trying to encourage others to share where they're at with travel demand management programs and analysis of those, and what kind of targets would be helpful or not.
Anyone have any thoughts on that question from Tara about how you're dealing with travel, with demand management in your tools and analysis currently? I'm not seeing anyone jump in on that. I think that's sort of one of those that we have identified part of through all the GHG, TSNO, pricing, travel demand management things to get better at in our tool sets, Tara. Right? Yeah.
It always tends to be like a, off model, post process kind of thing, right, Tara? And so, we just haven't cracked that nut in a, explicit way, it seems like. Some of those programs lend themselves better to, accounting for them more explicitly in the model platform than others, but yeah, we need to get better at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some off the shelf, but I also, am aware of a lot of really interesting and maybe more effective TDM type programs that are happening, like the transportation wallet, where they give you scooter passes. And, so it's just like, how do we even model these things is a challenge. It's not easy, they're diverse.
I think the ABM is going to give us a lot of power, but as I think about these things sometimes, I think that the challenge that we probably all know is the hard part is going to be determining what parts of the population are participating.
Yeah.
So the ABM will give us the ability to kind of toggle on, almost any TDM program you could want to code up. So we will have that rich ability to do that, but it's all about So the tricky thing then is about, well, which populations are getting to participate.
And really, I think that's what we're talking about here, because Karen's going to have a big data set of surveys, right? So if we ask the right questions in those surveys, which right now they're just saying trips, SOV, or other, right? So we'd like to get a more diverse set, and we could actually sort of fine tune those models, right? But I don't think what they're collecting now, which, you know, Karen is talking about expanding. So I think that's why the intersection with OMSC is to think about what, at a bare minimum, would we want to get out of that survey that could help us? And I don't think we're talking like a rigorous survey, like, you know, Chris, you're going out and doing a lot more of that, right? With that consultant and everything. So we may not get to that holy grail, but there might be something intermediate here where we could kind of check on our models and, like you're saying, which populations are doing this. So if we would know more demographics about the people who are picking up a scooter or an active lifestyle versus others, we could help with our models. So I think that's exactly the bullseye here of, you know, what puts Karen on our agenda is a two-way street of, you know, us helping her with what we might contribute and what data would be useful to come back to us.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I would make that connection back up to the conversation with Cody a little bit, Tara, on the climate friendly. To me, there's this big question about the future year demographics and allocations and what kind of what information we want to tie to that demographic population in the future. And this would be one of those, is do we do that, and how do we do that? Because that's what the models, that's, you know, inputs the models need to do all of this work. And that's going to, so I think that's going to be a bit larger conversation than maybe people are anticipating, and a really, really important one, because that's going to drive most of the decisions for people, right? And I think that's kind of what Alex was getting at too, and everybody's touching on, man, how do you do that and get a good allocation of that and apportionment to demographic makeups for the future, right? Mike, did you have a thought?
Yeah, you know, when you brought that up earlier, Brian, I was thinking back to something Sonny Condor at Metro many, many years ago said. We were just having casual conversations about this thing, about, you know, we assume that in the higher density compact development areas in Metro, people are, you know, walking a lot more, or taking their bike, or using less vehicles because of the built environment. And he was questioning that. He was saying, well, it's kind of self-selective. People who like to do those things move into those areas because they are those type of people. They are that's their choices. And it's not so much the built environment that changed them. It's they are those people that move into that built environment. So can we assume a built environment is going to change people's natural behavior, or just attract people who normally just would do that anyway? So it's kind of a chicken and egg question. It's a good philosophical question.
Yeah, but then there's probably and there's probably those groups that would be inclined to do it if the infrastructure was there to do it, right? So there's kind of all maybe 3 or 4 different segments to that. It's a good one. Plus, you tend to get smaller households making fewer trips in those higher density developments. So yeah, there's a lot of things that come into play there, right? Well, I think we're running on a little bit time here, right, Carol? I can feel Carol thinking.
Can I ask real quick question, Brian?
Yes.
Karen, who, if anyone from Metro, is on your TAC? Is Caleb Winter on your TAC? Okay.
No, the two, the Dan Kempf is the primary rep, and Marnie Duke is the alternate from Metro.
Okay. I'll reach out to Dan and Marnie just to you know, get them in the loop in terms of what we're doing with our new survey efforts, and kind of prime them a little bit as to maybe what types of information you all ought to be seeking in your, you know, more scaled down survey efforts, and see if we can get maybe some alignment, or, you know, or sort of useful data, you know, kind of like along the lines of what Sarah was suggesting. So
appreciate it.
Kelly.
Hey, I I'm in the Central Lane MPO area, so Eugene, Springfield. Just curious if you've had any conversations with any of the folks here doing the TDM programs here, and I can put you in contact. If not, they might be good resources.
Let's see. Yes, I think, but City of Eugene folks, so I don't know what the overlap is with Central Lane MPO, but Larissa Varela from City of Eugene Planning will be a RAC member. I did do a presentation last year to the group of folks that were envisioning starting to plan for a Lane County or a City of Eugene transportation or ordinance around commute options. So I'm not remembering exactly who the audience members were, but so there may have been someone from Central Lane MPO that was part of that presentation, but I don't quite remember.
And that's fine. As long as I was just more curious if you've had some contact with folks in the region here.
Yeah.
And just so you know, Larissa is no longer with the City of Eugene, and so she'll need to be replaced. Sorry.
No wonder she didn't fill out the poll.
Yeah, I think she just I don't know where she went off to, but
oh shoot. Okay, well thank you for once again, I think I'm ready to go, and
yeah, I know 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but okay. If you need help making any contacts, please let me know.
Okay, I will very likely follow up with you, Kelly, for another suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, great. Thank you, Karen. Okay, so the last couple of items are kind of the good of the orders. So roundtable member updates, anything anybody wants to bring up and highlight that you have going on that this group might be interested in that we haven't talked about yet today?
Just note that there's a lot going on, and it feels like a lot of it is centering around like modeling needs and performance measures and data needs. And we've been trying to kind of map out what all that means for staff and capacity. And I don't know if we're getting any closer to understanding it, but we're trying to at least track it a little bit more. And I don't have anything substantial to say about that. It just feels like there's a lot going on. And I think it's all like getting us in the right direction, but we're getting over some big workloads right now, or getting into some big workloads. Maybe that's the
yeah, I think you're right. And so a lot of the way, because so the unit I manage covers a whole lot of different things, right? And this is one of the areas is related to the modeling. One of the things I'm noticing that's kind of going on is, for like the agency, we have the Oregon Transportation Plan going on, which is our big policy plan. It's not detail. Then we have the highway plan we're going to be moving into. Meanwhile, we have things like the TPR that are traditionally mostly system plan, but really moving into an operational analysis level requirements, and then we have a lot more reporting monitoring. And the challenge we're having is just the data and information and measures that people need. They're getting them really confused, and they want to use them sort of, I wouldn't say inappropriately, but in a venue where it's really hard to use them for the purpose they want them. So really kind of going through and making sure that we understand what level of a decision are we working at here, what kind of information people need. And then sort of for us is the technical side, pushing back a little bit and trying to keep them from going into too much detail too quickly, but the challenge we have is all of those are sort of being worked on simultaneously right now. Instead of traditionally, they would have more fed through each other and informed each other, because we could move all the way through. And then for us, maybe the highway plan comes out with a whole different set of types of measures and things that guide ODOT's work than any of these other things are thinking through right now. So it's definitely a challenge. I think it's going to be about a 5-year process, Kelly, to really get through. So, and even like we were talking about with Cody, the rule is going to be, signed and so forth. So pretty soon, but it's going to take a couple of years just to get some of the zoning stuff in place, and then it's going to take time after that to start really going through some of the plans and using that information. So we'll just have to pay close attention to that on the technical side, right? But I agree, a lot of moving parts right now. Yeah.
Yeah, well stated.
Yeah, so I don't know, Alex or Tara or Becky, did any of you want to say anything about sort of what might be going on and where anything to highlight from the Oregon Transportation Plan, Highway Plan stuff you guys have been engaging in?
Well, I'm not sure how much you want to dive into it, but just that it's moving along on, it's a little bit behind, but relatively on track. So I think we anticipate it's going to be done this calendar year. And Amanda, the division administrator, Amanda Peets is stepping in with a little bit of a bigger role, and she really approaches this, I think, as the minds on this call would, from a very kind of analytical, quantitative kind of mindset. So she's really going to try and put some real trade-off and priority work into the OTP, so that it's not just a bunch of good sounding goals and objectives, but kind of a real, well, how are you evaluating the trade-offs and making priorities within these goals and objectives. So that's really exciting and interesting. I saw Becky came off camera. I don't know if there's a...
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
The only thing I would add to that is the way it's organized. They have a really big team of consultants. And so every team, there's a lot of things happening simultaneously. And Alex, Tara, and myself, we've been very involved on the modeling side, the scenario analysis, so the technical assumptions and target years and how to use the tools effectively and all that kind of thing. We're really intimately familiar with that. But the other work we're less connected to, and I think the modeling is far more ahead of those other groups, but they're looking into things like equity and livability and a pretty large amount of topics, because it is our umbrella plan. So it's really needed. So we can inform you more on that kind of the modeling and analysis side and less on the other parts. That was all the only other part I was thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, I was
Tara, do
thinking,
you have anything more?
I was thinking there might be a good topic for the next meeting, maybe in October. Maybe there'll be some things from the scenario and analytical parts that you guys have all been doing.
Yeah.
At that time.
I think that timing would lend. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, and Kelly already touched on this, that there's a lot of things going on now and then more coming, and it does impact the OTP because we've lost some resources. For example, Eric Hovig, who is our planning section manager, he has actually been his time is more focused on another project and less on the OTP, and then Amanda is spending more of her time on the OTP. So there's been some shuffling at the higher management level, and it just makes it a little harder for us on this end to know what to expect and which way it's going to go, because people are really busy.
Yeah, thanks. Tara, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is that I think something that's new, that's different maybe from previous ones, is really kind of a focus on the financial sustainability of the agency. We know that as people are going to electric vehicles, that's like, a problem for our revenue sources. We have, we're ahead in Oregon and sort of thinking about that. But if we don't do that, and actually even that will only, get us to somewhere on the order of paying for half of our roads. So unless we increase that. So it's really kind of trying to put front and center that trade-off with the pricing need, and also then the impact that might have on travel behavior towards some of the other goals. So I think, we haven't in the past, we've always had this like free pass to a bunch of money that we can buy. And this time we're actually talking about how if we don't change, we won't have any money and there might be some problems that we have to deal with. So I think that's a little different lens that we've had in the past that will be in the OTP.
Yeah. And I think another lens is just remembering it's statewide lens, and as Cody and other people mentioned today, a lot of the population lives in a very small geographic part of the state. So, you know, probably 90% of our lane miles or something are outside of any of these MPO areas, and they're key access to certain parts of the states for goods and services and all those kinds of things that people, you know, and those of us who live in the urban areas don't really think about that as much. So it's a different kind of set of goals that encompass what we've talked about here before, you know, but also go beyond that. So it'll be interesting, but that might be a good topic for the next meeting, Carol. It's getting, you know, I don't know if it maybe be getting Adam here.
Yep, that sounds good. I got those down.
Great. Anything else anyone wants to highlight that you have going on? Okay, well, if you think of anything, make sure to get that to Carol if you have any other ideas. I think we have a exec meeting coming up in May, Carol. So I guess, you know, one of the things for me that I'll say, since this is my last meeting chairing the committee, so Chris will be moving into that for at least the rest of this year and maybe beyond that, right? And then I assume for ODOT, my replacement, once we have that person in place, will be transitioning into the committee with to take my place, sort of. Whether that'll be as what that'll look like will be figured out later. But, you know, again, thank you guys for the kind words that you gave me today. I appreciate that. And something, you know, specific to this group, I think something that's really unique about it is it's one of the few venues that we have technical people from different agencies with different backgrounds that get to come together and collaborate. And we've really heard that from a lot of the smaller agencies over the years, is that they just don't, they might be a technical person, but they don't really have anyone to bounce ideas off and vet things with, you know. So that's a really, really critical part of this committee that I think we just sometimes get accustomed to and used to. But just that collaboration on tools and making sure that we're supporting each other in decision making, because it's really easy to make technical stuff irrelevant by having everybody go in different directions. So I would say that's one of the big foundations for all of you that are here, is really thinking about what are those assumptions? How do we align them? How do we try to define performance measures as consistently as we can, so we're not confusing people? All those kinds of things I think this group really plays into, because we do have a diverse set of folks from a lot of different agencies with a lot of different interests here. And all the policy people and planning folks rely on us to be talking about that stuff and making sure that technical issues aren't going to come up in their processes out of left field somewhere. So that would be my thoughts for this group, just kind of as a reminder that that's a really, it's really, really important, that technical collaboration. We don't have very many venues to do it in. So I appreciate everybody and the energy and effort you all put into this is really, really important. So thank you all for that.